Well, welcome back to Bookish, everybody. As if you don't know, we're the virtual program on authors, thinkers, and the literary life brought to you by the Southern California News Group in conjunction with the Bay Area News Group. I'm Sam Dunn, the senior editor of premium content here, and I want to give a big thank you to our Reader Rewards subscribers for supporting our programs and our newspapers. Without you, we are nothing, my dear. If you are a Reader Rewards subscriber attending tonight, you're automatically entered to win a $50 gift certificate from our partner, Once Upon a Time Bookstore in Montrose, a great indie bookstore. Check them out. And also, I have to say congratulations to our winner from last month, Dixie Matheson. Dixie, we hope you're reading your heart out with that $50 gift certificate. And listen, straight talk, if you are not a subscriber yet, why aren't you a subscriber? In Southern California, you can go to scng.com/subscribe and find your local paper. Please become a stakeholder in local journalism. We need you. And if you've missed any of our past programs, go to scng.com/virtual programs and check those out too. Also, speaking of checking out, check out our cool Bookish swag for us stylish book nerds. Anyway, before we get started, let me remind you of a few things. If you have questions, and we hope you do, please use the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar. And if you just want to add a comment, use the chat feature also found on your screen. If you put questions in the chat, it scrolls up and we miss the questions. That's why we ask you to use the Q&A feature. And listen, don't worry, you're not going to miss a thing because a link is going to be sent to you later after the show. And the show is also posted at scng.com/virtual events that I mentioned earlier. It's also posted on YouTube, but at virtual events, you can find all of our past shows and see what's coming up next. Now it is time for our beloved host, author, performer, playwright, Sandra Singh Low. She's beaming in again from New York, where she's busy with productions of her play Mad Women of the West and other exciting business. Sandra, how are you?
Hello there. I hope you enjoy my funereal lighting, which will be only matched by Steve Almond's traditionally funereal lighting.
Yes, we will see that later. You and Steve, Prince and Princess of Darkness. Anyway, listen, I'm going to beam out. I will let you get to it because we have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about.
We do. All right. See you. And congratulations, Dixie Matheson. My goodness. Enjoy those books. All right. First up, we have Rene Denfeld, and here is our 30-second download. Rene Denfeld is the award-winning best-selling author of 4 novels, The Enchanted, The Childfinder, The Butterfly Girl, and what we'll be talking about today, Sleeping Giants. Her writing has been praised by Margaret Atwood as astonishing. Her novels are influenced by her work as a licensed death row investigator. She's a past chief investigator for public defenders and has worked hundreds of cases. Extraordinary background there, and she speaks regularly on social justice issues. We'll speak more about that too. In 2017, the New York Times named Rene a Hero of the Year, and she was awarded the Break the Silence Award in Washington, D.C. She's received so many prestigious awards, the French Prix, an ALA Medal for Excellence in Fiction, a Carnegie Listing Dublin Literary Award, the list goes on. She lives in Portland, Oregon, where she is the happy parent of kids from foster care. Her incredible new book is Sleeping Giants. Welcome, Rene.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my goodness. Your story is so exemplary. It's extraordinary, your journey to this book. So if you could tell our viewers just a little bit about from child, like to write the novel that you've written and a few places in between.
Sure.
I know that.
Oh, of course. My history?
Yes.
Absolutely. So I am a child from a very difficult background. I experienced a lot of poverty and neglect when I was little, and I actually ended up being homeless as a child, lived on the streets of Portland, Oregon as a young teen. And I'm just extremely lucky to have survived that. And I think having that background just kind of, it imprinted on me. I always wanted to be a writer. But to be honest, I kind of felt like people from my background, we weren't destined to be writers. So it took me actually all the way until my 40s before I wrote my first novel. But in that period in between, being a homeless kid to writing my first novel in my 40s, I got into justice work. I wanted to help other people. I became a foster and adoptive parent. So I put a lot of my energies into that. And long story short, the miracle of it all was by doing all this work, helping others, it kind of fed my own soul. and I started writing. It was just like this explosion of what felt like poetry from me, of these stories I wanted to tell, you know, from my own experiences and from the experiences of other people that I've worked with.
And can you describe the moment, I guess, when you started your first novel or got the idea to start, the moment where you go, I'm going to write this now?
Oh, it was so beautiful. I'm really glad you asked, because for me, it was one of those moments, you know, when we have in our lives where, you know, life just kind of exploded for me. And so what had happened was I was working a case on Oregon's death row. We have a death row here, and quite a few people at that time were on our death row. And I was working a case, and I was leaving the prison where we have our death row, walking through the parking lot. And I vividly remember it was a spring day and the sun was coming down. I had my car keys in my hand. And I heard this voice of a man saying, "This is an enchanted place." And I realized that this was an inmate in this facility. I felt like I'd never met him. And I followed that voice into my first novel, The Enchanted. And it was like everything that had happened in my life just kind of came together in that moment. And I realized this is what I want to do. I want to tell this story. And now I'm on my fourth novel, and I just love it. I love being a writer.
And can you just describe with your current novel, if Sleeping Giants, just the opening? Can you just set up the opening for the viewers for a moment, and can we take off from there and discuss the book?
Of course. So it was actually, I was down on the Oregon coast. And for those that aren't familiar with the Oregon coast, we have this kind of beach line it's not for swimming, it's not for wading. You don't even usually go close to the ocean here. It's very tumultuous and dangerous. And I was actually down on this beach one day, and I saw the opening image. I got the opening image from this book. And it's this little boy who is charging across the sands of this beach, and he runs headfirst into this very dangerous stretch of ocean, and he ends up disappearing and is presumed dead. And that's how this novel opens. It's just kind of with a big thunderclap of this scene of this little boy who is charging into the ocean and leaving the reader with the question of why. Why did he do this thing?
And it's not a spoiler alert, but part of the take in foster
Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties.
there's a horrifying technique used. Can you describe it?
I think she's going to ask you about holding time.
Okay, I know. I'm sorry that we're having technical difficulties.
I know.
Yeah, go ahead.
But that is one of the driving elements of this narrative, and it's based in a real technique. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a good part of the book is about, it's set in this residential facility, this home for boys that's down on the Oregon coast. And a lot of this is inspired by my experiences as a foster and adoptive parent and working juvenile cases. We have a lot of kids in foster care in this country. We don't have enough foster homes. And so a lot of them end up in these kind of modern day orphanages. And the little boy in the Sleeping Giants, this particular story, is living in one of these homes. And unfortunately, he is subject to a so-called treatment method that's real. And it's actually really used today. It's called holding time, which is a very gentle way of describing what is actually horrific treatment method. It's actually been implicated in the deaths of at least 6 children. So I wanted to kind of use this novel to talk a little bit about what happens to these kids in these places.
And the villain, if you will, she's a really interesting character, and I think that she doesn't act out of what she thinks is cruelty. Can you describe how you see her?
Yeah, her name is Martha, and she's the treatment director in this place. And so a big part of this book, I think it's really a page turner. And a lot of the mystery is like, what's going to happen to this little boy? And there's also, you know, a whole nother plot line as well. And for me, it was a chance with the Martha King direct character. She's the director who's using this particular treatment method. It was a chance to kind of talk about how much harm is committed by people who think they're doing the right thing. And for me, this is a really pertinent subject to be discussing nowadays, because we see so much harm in the world, and it's not committed by people who believe they're out to do the wrong thing. They're actually believe they're doing the right thing. So, you know, whether you're talking about the history of genocides or slavery or mass incarceration, I kind of wanted to just dig into this subject, like all the harm that's committed by people who are convinced they're absolutely in the right. And this villain character, Martha, believes that she is in the right.
I think Sandra's stuck again. Sandra, are you there? Oh, let me just step in, Renee, and say many of your works, your other previous novels, have also addressed issues of justice, of equity. How do you actually approach your work? Is it through characters and then those concerns, because they are so organic to who you are as a writer, just filter through? Or do you begin with the idea and then create the characters? How does that work for you?
I don't want to sound too woo-woo, but it's usually a voice. It's usually I hear the voice or get an image or get a feeling for the characters first, usually one of the characters. And yeah, it's always inspired kind of, I think all fiction is really inspired by our lives. And
Yeah.
for me, at least, fiction can kind of tell a deeper truth in some ways, because we're kind of getting into all the nuances of real people in these stories. So in this story, yeah, it was the little boy who was living in this treatment center and all the things that happened to him. But I want to say there's a lot of good things that happen in this book, because you know, it's also a story about like how we have the capacity not just to do harm, but we have this capacity to really help each other as well.
Well, that's true, because the relationships among the characters are surprising, and the way they help and connect with each other is really emotionally satisfying in the work. So,
Thank you.
Sandra, I'm sorry, I just stepped in because we couldn't hear
Thank
you.
Yes, I'm freezing. Two thoughts to run with. One is, Renee, the role of imagination for children and for people as a way out, and the role of animals in this book, which is so powerful. Can you talk about that?
You know, for me, as a little kid growing up with some really, really terrible things, to be honest, I escaped through stories and books. I became a voracious reader. And when I was like a little homeless kid living on the streets, I actually spent all my time in the downtown library. And I remember just sitting at a desk surrounded by books and watching the rain come down the windows. And it was my 15th birthday. And for me, I really believe, you know, we talk so much about resiliency in our culture, but I think imagination is the true resiliency. Because when somebody has an imagination, when somebody can tell themselves a story, then the world becomes limitless. And you can imagine yourself having a different future. You can imagine yourself having a different life. So, you know, even though I came from these really difficult backgrounds, I think through imagination, I developed a profound hope and this sense of optimism about the power that we all have to make the world better. And so that's something I just really believe in it strongly. And in this particular story, it came out actually, interestingly enough, you mentioned the animal characters. And this is my first book that actually has animal characters. And I was so tickled to write them. There's a rabbit and a polar bear, and they actually have very important storylines in this book.
Don't forget, oh, I don't want to give it away, never mind.
But they, you know, because I think we just hunger for love so much in this world. And we make, part of the book is about chosen family, the families we make with people and other creatures that are inhabit our planet.
Love that. Thank you. Sandra, are you still with us, or has the...
I am. I think that in an earlier novel, The Child Finder, yeah, I think you talked about the girl character as imagining fairy tales and how potent fairy tales are sort of his storytelling also. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so, one of the things I used to love reading as a kid were fairy tales. And if you think about it, it makes so much sense, because where else do you have stories where people are locked in dungeons? They're thrown into ovens, they're roasted alive, they're tortured. The children in fairy tales are not having an easy existence. And yet there's always hope in fairy tales. There's always rescue. And I think fairy tales and actually folklore, they appeal to us at this very primal level, because they are a recognition of the tragedy of this world. And they're also a recognition of our own resourcefulness and our ability to, grow our hair long and make a ladder for ourselves out of the top of the dungeon, or to leave a little trail of crumb through the woods so that we can find our way out. I mean, fairy tales are extremely optimistic if you think about it. So, the Sleeping Giants is actually, I have a copy here, I can show it.
Yes.
Yay. Oh no, it's backwards, of course. But I think this is my fourth novel, and in a way I think of all my books as kind of fairy tales. They all have those elements, because they deal with sometimes some difficult things, but personally I think there's a sense of lightness in the story, and there's this underpinning of hope and optimism, because that's something I experience, on the daily in my own life.
Love that. Sandra, are you there? Listen,
Oh, poor Sandra.
I know, poor Sandra, she's stuck. Listen, Renee, that was beautiful. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm just so honored to be on this program. Thank you so much for having me. And
I
I love to hear from readers. So you guys shared my socials and stuff. If anybody wants to reach out and have a conversation, I'm here for you.
That sounds good. Do you want to leave your website in the chat for us, Renee, before you head out?
Yeah, I can go ahead and mute myself in a second and pop down there and say hi.
That sounds perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Mwah.
Next time, next book. See you next time.
I lacked the magic to get myself out of unfreeze, but
All right, I'll let you talk to Steve now. I'll beam out for a minute.
feel free to hop in. Okay, amazing. Okay, thank you so much. So we go from Renee to Mr. Steve Almond, who's one of our favorite guests on the show. Mr. Almond, Steve, is the author of 12 books of fiction and nonfiction, including All the Secrets of the World, a novel that we featured on the show, New York Times bestsellers Candy Freak and Against Footballs. His essays and reviews have been published in the New York Times, To Plowshares, To Poets and Writers, Short Fiction, Best American Short Stories, the Pushcart Prize, Best American Mystery Stories, and Best American Erotica. He's the recipient of grants from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, the NEA, and some of you may know he co-hosted the Dear Sugars podcast with Cheryl Strayed for many years and teaches creative writing at the Nieman Fellowship at Harvard and Wesleyan. He lives in Massachusetts. He comes to us from his candy dungeon. Welcome, Steve.
I feel like Renee was the light and I am like descending into I'm in the dungeon right now, hoping for rescue.
Well, I'm going to freeze up soon, so I probably can't save you. But you've written a book about writing. It's so delightful.
Oh no, Sandra, you're drowning. You're drowning.
It's the arrow, mercy is the bow. Please explain the title.
Yeah, so the title, which I'm very thankful, like Zando, the publisher, didn't go with their first instinct, which is the search optimization engine, get craft in there, get writing guide or whatever, creative writing. They let me put this kind of weird Buddhist coin title on it. And it's basically kind of boiling down what I think allows people to write truthfully, which is that they have to go in search of forgiveness. They have to really have a posture of wanting to understand, not to blame or indict or flatten people out, even the people who behave destructively because their love gets distorted into destructive impulses. And over the years, it's like, they edited it down to Jesus wept. Like I've said this in a lot of long-winded, mealy-mouthed ways. And I finally at some point along the trail was like, look, truth is the arrow, mercy is the bow. That's how it works. You're only going to travel as far into the truth as mercy will get you, especially if you're writing, as Rene said, anything you're writing, even if it's in fictional disguise, is coming from the deepest precincts of your inner life, which can be a pretty haunted place with a lot of grievance and a lot of defensive emotion, alienation, and rage. And, you know, the writer's job is to peel back those defensive emotions. Underneath alienation is thwarted desire. Underneath grievance is always grief. And underneath rage is almost always sorrow. And that's your job. But in order to do that, I think you really have to be emotionally vulnerable, and you have to kind of surrender and try to get rid of the impulse to, in some way or another, kind of have your say or flatten things out. Your job is to understand everybody and to forgive, not to forget or absolve of the things they did, but to try to understand with a real humility and curiosity why your characters behave in the ways that they do.
This delightful book is about narrative structure. So the overarching arc is your novel, which took you, your fantastic novel, which took you 20 or 30 years to write, possibly 30.
Thanks for the reminder.
Sandra, you're underwater again.
A little bit.
Can you say that again, Sandra? You're underwater. Oh, I'm sorry. I think she's asking, I'm not sure. It sounds like
how the novel informs the book.
Yeah, I mean, so it's sort of being marketed as a craft book, although I really see it more as a book about the storytelling impulse. Really, a lot of what Rene was talking about was resonating. I think everybody is a storyteller. I think that's how human beings understand and make meaning out of what can feel like painful, chaotic episodes. And the portal to that is always story. That's what Rene was talking about when she's sitting there at age 15 with a lot of things going wrong and a lot of danger and vulnerability. And she's there in the library, like connecting to story as a path to some kind of salvation or self-understanding or just acceptance of the situation you're in. And so for me, I didn't want to write a book there's a section that's about craft that's trying to put very simple, direct language to stuff I've struggled with. But I didn't want to write the book like the craft book is such an arrogant form, like I have figured it out and here's my secret sauce. That's not how it feels for me at the keyboard ever. No matter how much I can put language to it in a book or in the classroom, when I'm sitting, and I'm sure Sam, you feel this way, Sandra, you just feel lost. You're choked with doubt. You have to make all these decisions and it's brutal and you're never sure that they're the right decisions. And I wanted to write from that place of saying, I am not, my process is not the answer, but I do know that you have to outlast your doubt. And I do know that failure is kind of your best teacher if you can accept it and not try to hide it away. And even writer's block, which people sort of think of as the ultimate awfulness of writing, it's actually like an ally in your creative process. Every time I've been blocked, it's allowed me to strip away some stupid writerly vanity that I had about the book I should be writing and to ask a much more useful question, which is like, what's the book I want to write? Or even, what's the book I feel capable of writing at this moment, kind of feeling beaten down? I'm a big fan of everybody just lowering their expectations and not making writing a station of the cross. So I think that's kind of the attitude of the book. I didn't want to say, here from on high is the wisdom I've received. It's more like, here are all the things I've screwed up and all the dark places I've been when I've been trying to create. And you're going to encounter these too. Don't freak out. There is an answer. You get to breathe. It sometimes takes a while.
Oh, yeah.
I can't believe I spoken so profoundly that Sandra is struck mute by my eloquence, my dream.
You know what?
I know it's just Zoom. I know it's just Zoom.
I can tee you up an easy question that I don't like. Steve, can creative writing be taught?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those obnoxious questions that's sort of posed mostly, it's kind of the ultimate troll question. And, the answer is, well, getting somebody's ass in the chair to make all those decisions and to outlast their own doubt and to have that kind of perseverance and humility and patience. Nope, you can't teach that. You can model it. Sam Dunn models that as a teacher. and our pal Cheryl Strayed. And, you know, Rene models that just in how she speaks about writing and the role of story in our lives. But you can't teach somebody that, but you can, I think, really, really elementally help inspire people and get them to step back from the decisions that they've made at the keyboard and away from the ego need that we end up battering ourselves with, and to say, hey, these were decisions you made at a particular moment in your career. Here's the ones that were really great. Let's praise those. Let's figure out why they're so beautiful. Hint, because they're really true and precise and quick to the truth. And then there's these other category of decisions where you're confusing the reader, your insecurity and ego need are getting the better of your story. And let's examine those places and figure out how to just make the decisions better in the next draft. It's really hard to do, but that, I think, a good workshop and a good teacher is always trying to say, hey, it's all a draft. Quit beating yourself up. It's hard to make these decisions, but it's possible to put language to certain patterns in your writing that are holding your stories back. And even certain things in your inner life, your anxiety and your
Great openings of books.
Yeah. Great openings.
She's lost. We've lost her entirely. This is a fun show.
It's an interesting interview format.
It is.
It's kind of like, it's a little bit like trying to write a story. You're trying to sort of piece it together, and there are ideas, and but there's
so I'm going to ask 3 questions in a row. Write them down because I can hear you. Okay. 1 is great openings of books. Yep. Can you share some? Sure. 2, how have fiction writing students changed over the years? The memento question is hilarious. The role of obsession in literature. Those are the 3. Go. Okay. Great openings. Where's Papa going with that axe? Remember that, Rene? Speaking of animal characters, that's one of the great openings in all of literature. Here's Fern Arable, 10 years old, and it's a scene, you were opening in scene, but it's clear that it's like the elemental question. She goes and her mom says, oh, well, he's a litter of pigs was born last night, and Dad's going out to kill the runt of the litter. And Fern, like any human being, goes, oh my God, are you kidding me? He's going to murder a baby pig, even though the kitchen smells of bacon. We'll get there. At any rate, she runs out, she confronts her father and says, if I was the runt of the litter, Dad, would you kill me? And John Arable just stands stunned on the wet grass of spring and thinks, and a look comes over his face, E.B. White writes, as if he was going to cry himself. Such a brilliant opening, because it's really asking the essential moral question. Why do human beings feel they have dominion over the animal world? Don't animals have souls and desires and yearnings just like human beings? And of course, the rest of the novel is going to suggest that they do, right? Like Rene's novel. So I think that's a great opening. But the feeling I get around a great opening is that they're not trying to, the writer isn't out of their own anxiety that the reader's going to wander away and go like scroll Netflix. They don't throw you in a trunk. They don't just jump into scene without telling you who anyone is or what's at stake. It's more like a fairy tale. Like Rene was saying, once upon a time, it's this great narrator who says, this story is headed to the dark part of the map, the darkest part of the map. There's going to be lots of twists and turns. And I've got this vehicle that goes fast and it takes turns really well. And the door is open. We're headed there, no matter whether you come or not. I'm not going to stuff you in a trunk. We're going to that dark part of the map. It's your choice if you want to get inside and ride. That's for me what a great opening does, that narrative authority of like the story's headed there. It's up to you, reader, if you want to join us. You asked about obsessions. That was another thing you asked about. And I would say that's the default system of human consciousness. Stories are how we deal with our bewilderments, but obsessions are really the sense of urgency that we feel about things that in the process of growing up, ultimately are told not to obsess over things. It's too disruptive. Teachers and parents don't want us to feel that deeply about the world. But when we suppress those, they don't go away. They're actually spring-loaded by the force of suppression. And what I think good writers are able to do is to plug into their obsessions. And Rene was speaking to this. For her, the plight of prisoners, for instance, is something, or people who feel trapped, is something that she turns over in her life, consciously and unconsciously, all the time. So that's what has to be the source of the story. And I feel like any good writing has that feeling of urgency, because the question is,
if you could stop, writer, why should the reader keep going? It should feel like life and death. It should feel obsessional in nature. And I think you asked about how writing students have changed. I mean,
Yes.
I can't speak to that other than to say that I think all writers in this moment in history with visual stories, TV and movies as the dominant art form, writers come to the keyboard feeling this crushing sense of insecurity. And that insecurity leads to all kinds of, I think, inefficient and confusing decisions at the keyboard. We feel like we have to grab the reader by the throat, or they're immediately going to get bored and wander off to a movie or a TV show. We've lost faith in the traditional virtues of narration and storytelling, in trusting that a person who is picking up a book is patient and attentive, and they will dream your dream if you are able to get your ego out of it and get your doubt and insecurity out of it and keep your attention focused on the story. So for me, writing Nirvana is when I'm writing an essay or a story, whatever it is, where I'm more interested in the story than I am whether I'm telling it well. That to me is Nirvana. I can't get there often, but that's when the writing really feels good.
3 quick questions in a row. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
When you're at a literary magazine, 90% of the submissions you reject for why?
Mm-hmm.
Second is, are you worried that AI will replace fiction writing?
Mm-hmm.
And the third to end on is, could you talk a little bit about your Great Depression of 2003?
Oh, I love it. I really love talking about my Great Depressions. It's one of my favorite subjects, Sandra. Thank you for bringing it. You're such a classy host. Just go straight to my mental health struggles. Let's start with
And now freeze.
Yeah, right. Now you're going to be banished now that you've unleashed those questions. When I was editor of the Greensboro Review, many bongs ago, we would get like 1,500 stories, and we ended up rejecting 1,490 of them, ran maybe half a dozen stories each issue. And 90% of them we rejected because we just got confused. We fell out of the dream. People leapt into scene, or we could see the writer's insecurity causing them to step in between the characters and the reader, and mugging and writing fancy metaphors and ornamental language and busy attributives and all this stuff that you just start to notice over and over when you're reading that many stories. But mostly it was because the readers got confused. And we think out of our own ego need that the reader wants to be dazzled with our brilliance and our language, that will sort of answer the question, do you love me? Am I clever enough? Am I deep enough? But actually the reader's there for a friggin' story. That's why they're there, to attach themselves to the fate of the characters and make sure that those characters are pushed up against their fears and desires, hopefully with some kind of explosive, painful, confusing, beautiful self-revelation at the end. And that's what they're there for. In order to get into that story, they need information. They need to stay inside what John Gardner calls the continuous dream. And the moment they fall out, or they fall out a second time, for me anyway, that's enough. I don't trust that story anymore. I don't think AI is going to replace fiction writing. There simply isn't enough money in it. But also, AI is a machine that is combing vast troves of language in order to come up with the next predictable word. That's how they write those little silly, pieces of doggerel. The writer is trying to find the unexpected word, unexpectedly precise, unexpectedly beautiful, poetic, unexpectedly musical. We're in a different business. We're not a machine. We're a human soul trying to pay extra careful, special attention to the world and to find the unexpected, which is the reader receives as both disorienting in its precision, but also that beautiful intersection of astonishment and inevitability. Like, oh my God, I've never heard a tree or a leaf described with that kind of precision, but that's exactly what it looks like. So I don't think AI gets there. It's not designed to get there. It's a machine that's designed to answer questions and alleviate doubts. And human beings making stories are having a productive engagement with their bewilderments. They're not there to answer questions. They're there to make you feel less alone. That's the job of a story. And your final question has to do with the Depression of 2003. It's just fantastic to revisit it. I've written about 5 failed novels, And I don't have the experience that Rene does, although I admire and I sort of feel envy and admiration for her. She seems to write with great facility and love doing it. I do not write with great facility and I hate doing it. And I fail at it pretty routinely. So I wrote a book of short stories, expected that the world would immediately embrace it. And like all my old girlfriends would say, we were wrong, and drunk dial me, and people would throw money at me when I walked down the sidewalk. Turns out, spoiler alert, that's not what happens. You write a book of short stories, it sells 100 copies, your mom buys 50 of them, and then your agent says, where's the novel? So I dutifully sat there for 2.5 years and wrote 850 pages of a historical novel, way beyond my capacity to write, pushed the characters around the Levant in the 1600s for 850 pages, hoping they would bump into the big ticket items. They did not. And the agent took about 40 seconds to say, I don't think we should work together. And I'm actually firing you, although technically I work for you. I'm actually firing you. And that I was furious because she was right, of course. And then that burned off and I just fell through the floor into a depression. And that was not awesome. That sucked. But there was only one thing in those days that was getting me out of bed, which was a really good piece of chocolate. And that piece of chocolate, because it had to be cheap because I was having a lot of therapy, was purchased at a little second shop, the Haviland Chocolate Shop in Cambridge, near my bacterial apartment in Somerville. And I realized, like, upstairs, there is a place where they make this stuff. And because I've been a journalist like Sam, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna like finagle my way into this candy factory. And the moment I did, the depression just poof, it just evaporated. And the elevators smelled like, Halloween, like when you stick your head into the pillowcase on Halloween. And there were cauldrons of bubbling caramel and these conveyor belts carrying these beautiful little marshmallow bunnies that a curtain of chocolate came down and washed onto them, and the floor was covered with Necco wafers. It looked like a Kandinsky, and I was like, I'm in heaven. And all I wanted to do was get back into another chocolate factory. What had happened actually was that my soul had awoken. And just by instinct, by feel, I was like, oh, I've plugged into an obsession. This is something that will actually get me to the keyboard. And so I wound up writing this crazy book, which I had plenty of doubts about and sent off to agents. And they said, like, we don't know what kind of book this is. We don't know where it would go in Borders, which is a lot funnier now than it was back then. It's not like I was like, oh, I've found my voice. I found this brilliant piece of writing. I was like, I'm slumming. I failed at the novel. And now I'm writing a piece of disposable pop culture journalism. But actually, looking back, I wrote my way out of that depression. I plugged into my obsession. I realized intuitively when I was becoming curious and attentive and so interested in documenting what candy has meant to me as a path from despair and what production looks like and the wonders of it, that I was no longer interested in, am I telling it well? Am I proving my bones as a writer? I was just totally enthralled by the whole thing. And I think that's mostly what the reader is there for, is that enthrallment.
Let me just throw in a little piece of information for those in the audience who don't know. That little book of obsession was a New York Times bestselling book, Candy Freak, right? And you were on NPR, every media outlet there was out of that.
I mean, it was a bestseller for about 5 seconds on the extended list, but whatever, I'll take it. You know why I'm proud of that book? For the reason I mentioned, because writing is really hard. And when we get blocked, even when I was working on that novel, my fingers were going away and characters were doing things, but I was blocked. I was creatively blocked. I was love blocked. And then I had a little lesson. There's an essay in the book called Writer's Block, a love story. Like, that block was there to get rid of that big, stupid, vain question of what book should I be writing, and replace it with this much more useful question. What book do I really want to write? What excites me right now about the world? Where is the energy that's pulling me forward rather than me pushing through? And that can be very cleansing. I'm not recommending writer's block or the depression of 2003 in pill form as something in your writing life, but I am saying you're going to learn a lot more from your failures and your struggles than you are from those moments where it's really working. In those moments, you're just trying to stay in nirvana. You're just trying to stay in that flow state, and you can't force it. You can't will it to happen. You just have to try to show up at the keyboard and hope that it will happen.
Amen. I actually have a question, if you don't mind, Sandra. The last question.
Can I actually insert one before I freeze, and then you can take it from there? If you will host any word on bad poetry, the funniest, but if Steve has any thoughts about his bad poetry,
Oh
and
my
that's
God.
all. And now you host it as you will, Samantha. I will watch.
Yeah, so Bad Poetry is this weird little DIY book, along with Letters from People Who Hate Me and This Won't Take But a Minute, Honey, which is my weird DIY craft book. And Bad Poetry is started as a column on the Rumpus, and all it was were all the terrible poems that I wrote. I have an essay about this in the book called Run Howling Toward the Doubt. And it's really about like just having a year of writing spectacularly terrible poetry. And I don't mean when I was 16, I mean when I was 36. Like I had a book in the world and I'd gotten an MFA and I was teaching in a program and I was still writing this just adolescent, awful dreck. And rather than disavow it, I was like, these poems are so bad, they're good. And not only that, they're teaching tools. So if I can write about if I can put that terrible poem into a book and then write an essay about the actual thing, the story that was hiding behind that poem that I wasn't ready to tell yet, that might actually be interesting. And so that's what I tried to do in Bad Poetry. Our culture is so screwed up when it comes to our ideas of sort of failure and how that is, we're constantly being told to promote our successes and market ourselves and social media. And if we have a failure, it's just this terrible, shameful thing. We kind of slink off into quarantine. And I just think it's unhealthy. Like the predominant experience I have in life is of failing. And it makes me, I can't even participate when people post a success online. I'm like, that's just going to make me feel bad and envious. That's my own weakness, but I'm not happy for you. I'm sad for myself. But if somebody posts about a struggle, or like the 5 seconds after the beautiful sunset shot where everybody's smiling and everything's just gone to hell, I'm there all day for that. I can participate in that.
Love it. My final question. Steve, you are one of the best writing teachers anyone knows. You are also a brilliant writer, even though you disavow that brilliance often. But has teaching made you a better writer, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you're just constantly reminding yourself, and you're also kind of reconnecting. I mean, Sam, you know this, like you're reconnecting to how vulnerable everybody is and how hard everybody's trying. And yeah, I mean, I get very like it's also just a profound experience of emotional connection and intimacy, and it's sort of modeling for you like this is really what you're trying to do at the keyboard. I write about this weird thing in the introduction of going to teach in China, and I've struggled for a long time over how to sort of introduce the book, and I gave up. I tried a bunch of failed approaches, and then this moment came to me of this beautiful moment teaching through 5 different layers of translation in Beijing with no sleep, a bunch of 7th graders in a giant restaurant. It just made no sense at all. And yet, even through all that translation, this young woman stands up and tells this beautiful story about the bicycle that she wanted to ride as a kid, that she saw on the main square of her town. Her father didn't want her, and she just thought about this red bicycle all the time. And everybody in that weird room with teachers and some crazy American guy raving about obsession, everybody for like a precious moment was held in the story. I call it the holy jolt. And I think you go looking for that in your writing, but I think you also, teachers like you and I, Sam, we find that in the classroom, and that's what reminds us why we're in the struggle, why it's worth battling through all the decision fatigue and the doubt and the unsuccessful projects. That's the goal, is to just outlast your doubt, keep your faith alive. And, that's a hard thing to do. And when students are really modeling for you, the teacher, how hard they're trying without the big New York Times bestseller, the narcissistic external validation, they're just purely in it because they want to understand themselves a little bit better and share that with the world. That's just beautiful and inspiring. And I'm not sure it's made me a better writer, but it's maybe made me like a more determined to keep writing kind of writer.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Renee. This is fan-frickin-tastic. That's the technical term. Really appreciate you guys tonight. And thanks everyone for joining us. We're at the end of our time. Also, I want to thank our production manager, Julie Corlett, who is the Oz behind the curtain who makes everything happen. I hope you guys that you've enjoyed tonight's wonderful conversation. Please join us again next month for more surprises on Bookish, and always check out our other virtual programs too. If you want to share your thoughts from today or you have additional questions, please email us at events@scng.com. And if you want to give me suggestions on the show directly, reach me at sdunn@scng.com. Remember, you can find great coverage on our books and our newspapers every day and online at our news sites. And now we have a clip from our books editor, Eric Peterson, to tell us what's coming up. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate your time.
Hey everybody, this weekend in the paper, we've got the authors of The Unclaimed, which is a great book about a really kind of interesting, unusual topic. It's about the people who die in Los Angeles County. There's more than 1,500 every year who are not claimed by family members, and what happens to them, their lives, the people who investigate their lives and who they were and what happens. So we have that conversation. You can read it online. It's also in the Sunday paper. We're also talking to Jason De Leon, a UCLA professor, about Soldiers and Kings, his book about human smuggling as opposed to human trafficking, and he makes the distinction, and it's a really interesting conversation that I hope that you'll check out, also online and in the Sunday's paper. Jose Vadi's book, Chipped, talks about his life here in Southern California and in Northern California as a skateboarder, aging. It's got a lot of things. It's about California and skateboarding and life. Also, I've got a conversation with Catherine Scanlon, an LA author who has won 2 awards in the last month for a book that in the book pages, the newsletter, I have talked about this book more than once, and I'm thrilled to be talking to her, and I hope that you'll read that. It should be up by the time you read this. So that means I will be finishing writing it after I do this. So anyway, thanks everybody. Take care. See you soon.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.